How do children of missionaries who've taken part in shared church in other countries relate to platform-centered church after returning to the United States? Kara Garrison, a missionary whose children grew up in Thailand, can speak to that from experience. Welcome, Kara.
Thank you. Thank you.
Where are you living now?
Right now, we're living in Tulsa, Oklahoma, my husband and I. Our kids are grown and are living in various parts of this area of the country. And our youngest is in college in Mississippi.
And you and your husband served as missionaries in what countries?
Well, we served in Southeast Asia, and we lived primarily during the time that we were overseas in Chiang Mai, Thailand, and traveled to different areas.
And how many years did you spend there in Thailand?
14 years altogether. 12 years in Thailand itself, but 14 years in that area.
Which mission board did you serve with?
Well, we were and are still with Cornerstone International, which is a small sending agency out of Wilmore, Kentucky. And currently my husband is now director of that sending agency. But at the time we were missionaries in Southeast Asia.
How many children do you have?
We have 4 children, 3 daughters and 1 son.
What were their ages when you went to Thailand?
Our son was 6. Our youngest daughter was 8. Our second daughter had her 10th birthday on the day we arrived in Thailand. And our oldest daughter at the time was 12.
Well, what did your family experience in the way of shared church during those years in Thailand? I mean, things like strengthening one another, spurring one another on, building each other up, encouraging, that sort of thing.
When we were in Chiang Mai, Thailand, we had first gone to a traditional church and kind of looked around for a couple of traditional churches that were led either by Americans or people from the UK, or a pastor from Australia and one from New Zealand. So a variety of different leadership, but all from Western speaking countries. And then we just decided, this is too similar in dynamics to an American church. And while we're over here, we'd like to have a different type of dynamic. And so we started investigating house churches. Some of the shared experiences that were really positive for our kids was just the opportunity for them to discuss the scripture themselves and to be able to discuss it with other adults other than their parents, to be able to voice concerns or disbeliefs and have other adults speaking to them was really positive. And then just kind of a built-in way to build trust between individuals and community by having a shared meal each time. I think that was an important part. On the years that we did church in the mornings and started with breakfast, the young boys love that, especially if we served bacon, which was for them, when we would evaluate with the kids, what is an important part of house church in your opinion? Bacon always ended up on the list. So it wasn't all for spiritual reasons that the kids enjoyed it, but it was a lot of also social reasons, the ability to be considered a valuable part of the church community, and just emotional reasons. The kids felt valued in that place.
What was one of the most important things of fellowship around the table, around a meal?
One of the most important things is just that it gives a natural opportunity for life discussion to occur. And you could be processing something that's already been discussed in the teaching, or you could be processing things that were happening in life and in their, the kids' school community. And one of the nice things too was because the families were so integrated, is that you could see your friends' children inside the church setting or outside the church setting. You had things in common to talk to them about. And so you could see them on the street and have already developed this relationship inside the house church. And it really was a very natural intergenerational group.
And a table is very non-hierarchical, isn't it?
Absolutely. Sometimes you were sitting on the floor in groups. Sometimes you were sitting multi-generationally. Sometimes the kids went off and it was divided generationally. It didn't seem to matter. It had to be this way. It was always different depending on whose house it was at. And yeah, it was very non-threatening.
Upon her return to the United States, your oldest daughter, who I believe is now 28, had a very difficult time. Could you kind of describe her difficulty?
It was very difficult for her to integrate in what is formal church, because she had so valued the interaction. She said, "What is this?" And she says, "What is this where one person gives a lecture and the rest of us just listen to him? And who's listening to the rest of us? And how do we get to discuss?" And so it was very upsetting just recognizing, oh, this is the new normal. And she didn't like the new normal.
And has that had a kind of a continuing influence?
It has had a continuing influence on her. And one of the things that my husband and I have found over the last few years is we've returned to the States and we've followed up on several of our children's friends, is that it's not unique to our family, that there are children in other cities across the United States that grew up overseas and are having similar type of experiences where there's still want to be followers of Jesus, but they are very uncomfortable in this formal type of church community. They feel it's disingenuous.
What are some of the elements in your church gatherings in Thailand that are not typically present here in the U.S.?
One of the things that strikes me personally is just the lack of opportunity while you're at church to really fellowship with each other. One of the things that I find frustrating is you attend a Sunday school class, and after the Sunday school class, you're looking around for people you want to connect with, but there's this rush to get out of the Sunday school class because another Sunday school class is getting ready to meet in that same location, and because you need to quickly get to the service. And so it doesn't really lend itself to developing community and relationships. Especially, I think it's a problem in cities where there's a downtown church and people are residing so far away from the church as a center. That's the one time that they're going to have opportunity to be community with each other. That's the gathering place. And yet at the gathering place, there is not a good opportunity to really fellowship with each other. You're there to listen to somebody else, not to each other. And it's very formal. And the informal interactions that are really a natural part of house church are missing.
You mentioned the time crunch in Sunday school, but the time crunch is also there in the larger meeting, isn't it? Where it's pretty much in many churches just timed right down to the minute, and then it's got to end because maybe the next meeting is starting or something like that.
It's not just the formal part of the service that's timed, as much as I find it kind of humorous, and we travel to many different churches, but when you have 2 minutes to introduce yourself, to greet someone next to you, well, that's an empty exercise, in my opinion. I mean, it's not very genuine to greet somebody, especially for the very first time, in 2 minutes or less, and really welcome them and ask questions about them. There really is not opportunity to do that. And then when the service is formally over, people are scooting out of the church. And so there's not really a paradigm in which there is gathering just for the purpose of interacting with each other informally.
Your son once wrote a letter saying what he missed about church in Thailand. What did he say in that letter?
Yeah, about fourth grade, when we came back to the United States, he was working on an English assignment. He could write on anything that he wanted to, and really, it came out more like a letter about why he missed and loved house church and how he felt valued there. He felt like he was a member of everybody's family, and he even used the phrase, "It feels like family."
Well, clearly your children miss what happened in Thailand in church, but what about you yourself? What do you miss?
Actually, many of our friends have come back to the United States now because we're all in this similar season of life where our children are getting married, um, and we discuss frequently one of the biggest drawbacks in integrating into an American church is that there is this loss of community, that our friends at church are friends at church. I feel like more than many of our friends, we were able to reestablish long-term relationships because many of our friends have stayed in Tulsa and their kids have stayed in Tulsa. And so we haven't felt the same kind of pains that some of our friends have felt, but there is still definitely a difference. And it is a lot more work to stay connected with your friends here. And I would say too, we can stay connected with certain friends just between us and their families, but it's harder as a group to stay connected with friendships here.
In the mega church that you and your husband now attend, they have introduced a measure of participation in the way they do baptisms. Could you describe that?
Yeah, I really enjoyed one of the times that they do baptisms is during the sixth grade confirmation class. And one of the things that I've appreciated is that instead of using a formal baptismal, which is usually on the pulpit in the back of the platform of the church, kind of removed from the congregation, they've brought in a big trough in the front and brought it more onto the floor of the congregation. So that in itself seems kind of more participatory in many ways, but also the pastor has been very intentional about each child's name that is given just for the confirmation, whether they've gotten baptized or not. Some of them the names are read, and they may or may not get baptized. But regardless of whether or not they get baptized, when their names are read, the group, anybody that's related to those children, whether they've done Sunday school with those children, or they're connected to the children's family, or they maybe there's Girl Scout leaders or Boy Scout leaders for the children, whatever, they are to stand when that child's name is read. And so a child's name will be read, and a group of people all across the congregation sitting in different places will stand, and the next child's name will be read, and different individuals will stand. And it's just, so you see this movement, almost like a wave of people standing and sitting, and you could just see such an integration of people's lives with each of these individual names that were read. And I feel like that's a really positive, it's a small thing, and yet I feel like it's really integrated into the larger community, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, that's good. What elements from church meetings in Thailand do you think could and should be incorporated into church life here in the U.S.?
I don't feel like there's new things that need to be introduced into the church in the U.S. I think there needs to be old things that have been recovered, and old things that have been covered over that need to be uncovered again. And that would be church potlucks and more fellowshipping before and after church. So the very thing people say they're craving, community and fellowship, is not being valued because there's a concern that people won't stay for the very thing that they say they want. So that seems pretty conflicting